long-term effects of institutional racism, lost income and opportunities, and the toll this all takes on the financial well-being of Black Americans. The wealth gap that Yamiche just mentioned and reported on is believed to have widened last year during the pandemic, and it exists among all levels of education. We explore this now in the President's Initiatives with William Darity. He's a professor of economics and African American studies at Duke University. He has long studied and written about this. Professor Darity, very good to see you. Thank you so much for joining us. We know what happened in Tulsa 100 years ago, horrible in human terms. What about in economic terms? What did it mean over time, not only for the people of Tulsa, but more broadly for Black Americans across this nation?
So it's been estimated that the property losses, apart from the casualties and death, the property losses are estimated at a present value of in excess of $600 million today. And the implications across time have to do with the deprivation of resources for multiple generations. Tulsa's only one example or one instance of this type of atrocity. There were upwards of 100 massacres of this type that took place in the United States from the end of the Civil War into the 1940s, which had tremendous implications for the capacity of previous generations of Black Americans to provide resources for subsequent generations.
And you've done a lot of thinking, a lot of writing about what is due. Not only the individuals who experienced these massacres, riots across the country, but to Black Americans across time. And what in general do you believe is owed?
So I believe that the difference in wealth between Black and white Americans best captures the cumulative intergenerational effects of all of these atrocities, including the fact that at the very end of the Civil War, Black Americans were promised 40-acre land grants that were never delivered. And so if we look over time, the Black-white wealth gap is a consequence of what has occurred over multiple generations, and it captures the disadvantage that has accumulated for current generations. And it amounts to $840,900 on average between a Black and white household. Another way to think about this is Black Americans who have ancestors who were enslaved in the United States constitute about 12% of the nation's population, but possess less than 2% of the nation's wealth. So if we're going to close that gap, it would require us to make a national expenditure in excess of $11 trillion.
$11 trillion, an enormous sum. And what we are hearing from President Biden today is, among other things, he's talking about addressing housing inequities, taking a number of specific steps to try to ensure that the racial gap in the value of homes and the availability of housing is improved. He's also looking at economic opportunity, helping businesses. How far do steps like these go toward accomplishing the kind of broad reparations you're speaking about?
So this is a situation in which the proposals are not necessarily bad ideas, but they won't go very far in terms of eliminating racial wealth differences. The amounts are simply too small, and the focus is targeted on specific asset areas that are not necessarily the full range of assets in which there's a difference in Black and white wealth ownings. So if you look at the typical American's combination of assets, about 25% are attributable to an individual's primary residence, but a remaining 75% is attributable to retirement accounts, stocks and bonds, business ownership, and non-residential real estate. And so a focus exclusively on home ownership is not going to get us very far. And the amount that's proposed is extremely small relative to the entire gap.
Well, the Biden administration at this point is not speaking about, they're not taking a position on reparations. They've said it's something that they are studying, but one can assume that part of what's going on here is the political reality of how difficult it would be to get something of that magnitude passed through the Congress when the president is having a hard time even getting something like infrastructure through.
So it's over 155 years due. But you're correct. I don't think it's likely that a serious reparations plan would pass the current Congress. However, there has been a sea change in public attitude about reparations for Black Americans. In the year 2000, only about 4% of white Americans endorsed reparations.
Wow, 4%.
By the year 2018, that percentage had risen to 16.
Wow.
Low, but definitely not 4%.
Right.
And today, the best estimates suggest that it's about 30% of Americans who endorse the idea of reparative justice for Black Americans. So the momentum is moving in the right direction. We'll have to see if this is something sustainable. But other types of policies, like the president is proposing, fall far short from addressing the racial wealth gap.
I hear what you're saying, Professor Darity. They fall short, and we didn't mention the aid the president's speaking about in terms of transportation, where entire communities have been split open and divided because of highways, for example, that have gone through. But are these kinds of steps, are they harmful, or is it that they just, can they even count as first steps toward what you were saying is necessary?
If they were indeed steps that held the promise for a comprehensive effort in the future, then I'd be more enthusiastic about them. These are not bad things to do. They just will not have much of effect on the Black-white wealth.
And finally, if you could say something right now to President Biden about what else he should do, what would it be?
I think it would be very, very exciting and encouraging if he were to appoint a presidential commission to address the history of racial atrocities in the United States and design a full-scale proposal for reparations. He has said that he's in favor of some type of commission, but it seems that it's a congressional commission that he's referring to. I think it would be very impressive if we had a presidential commission to take on that task.
Professor William Darity of Duke University, we thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, there you have it. Getting closer and closer to reparations, but there needs to be another push